Dark bleatings, everyone. Before we get into the topic of the video, I have to tell you I'm feeling extremely under the weather, so if I sound or look a little bit off or weird, that's why. There's no cause for alarm, I just have a zombie plague. I thought what might be fun, or masochistic I guess, is to read some 1-star reviews of some of my favourite horror books today, and I have a list of 10 books here, and I just thought that this might be a hoot, you know, and I have to stress, everyone's opinion are valid, so I'm not saying that the people in these reviews are wrong, I'm just saying I disagree with the reviews, but you know, books and stories are subjective, people like and dislike whatever, you can't actually help it if you dislike something or like something, I guess. I just thought it would be a fun little exercise, and I'm gonna, you know, argue with a few of the points, but if you watch this and I happen to have used one of your reviews, please take this as the friendly banter that is. Also, there will be spoilers for a lot of these books as soon as I bring them up, so I will give you a few seconds, and I'm going to timestamp every book that I talk about here so that if you want to skip over something, you can, and I'm going to warn you about the ones where they're like major plot spoilers so that you don't have to listen to me argue with a review that completely spoils a book you haven't read. But anyway, let's dive in. So firstly, Richard Matheson's I Am Legend. For those who don't know, it was very ahead of its time, written decades ago. It's about a mutated disease that has caused vampirism in the entire public except for one guy, Dr. Robert Neville, who is living alone, fending off vampires and trying to find a cure. And it's, you know, really a book about one man's struggle to hold on to his hope that the future doesn't have to be this bleak, and he's very lonely. So let's have a little look at this review. I am officially a dumbass. I should have read the blurb. I thought this book was the same as the movie, and after reading the first few pages I was pretty disgusted by Robert being turned on by the female zombies. Them being vampires doesn't make it any better. For a 160 pages book, this one felt unusually long. I wanted to finish this quickly, but it was so frigging boring. I hated the protagonist, I was irritated by his alcoholism, temper tantrums and raging boners. The scientific explanation for the vampirism didn't stick. Even the supposedly great ending did nothing for me. So generally, you know, people can be quite judgmental about alcoholism, but I do think that if you're the last human being alive in your entire race and you're working completely alone to try and rectify things, you might have some psychological issues and maybe you might need a little crutch. The comment about the being annoyed, that disgusted that Robert's turned on by the vampires and that they're being vampires and not zombies, because in the film version with Will Smith they're like these weird CGI zombies, and I actually really hated the film because I read the book first. It's one of my favourite books, and I thought that we were finally on a third iteration going to get a more I don't know, loyal, faithful adaptation of the book, but yet again, as screen versions go, it just changed fundamental things. But it's funny to me that this reader was so disgusted by that aspect of it, considering that there is an entire subgenre that hinges on vampires being sexy to people, and it's, you know, Anne Rice wasn't the first person to do it, but she is probably the person who made this popular with Louis and Lestat. But we did previously have Carmilla. I think that was written. I think that was written in the late 1800s, and that was erotic as well. Not, you know, egregiously so, but there's definitely in there. And then we've got things like Buffy, True Blood, Twilight, The Vampire Diaries, like basically any YA series that, so that is what, so I just thought that was funny. Maybe this reader is like me and they just prefer horrible vampires like the 30 Days of Night kind. But I feel like this is a little harsh on Robert Neville. It's a little harsh and judgmental maybe. Raging boners, that did get me. And I personally really liked the ending because I didn't see it coming, but I read the book when I was a teenager and I hadn't seen the screen adaptations that existed before the Will Smith one, are The Last Man on Earth and The Omega Man, and I hadn't seen them, so I had no idea what I Am Legend was. This is pre-internet, by the way, that's how old I am, so it wasn't common knowledge. This story wasn't common knowledge then, so yeah, I respectfully disagree, and I found that review a bit funny. Next up, Stephen King's It. You all know that this is my favourite Stephen King book, and despite that one scene, and I've talked about this in my ranking Stephen King video, which I will link in the description for any King fans that might be interested. I ranked every book to date in 20 minutes or less, I think it was, and I did talk quite a bit about that scene in it today, so I just don't want to go over it again here, but I'm going to read part of this review. This book. This effing book. Some questions. Why does this book have such a high rating? What are you all reading that I missed? Why is this book, about a psychotic clown, sort of, who actually appears in this book only a handful of times, 11 effing 100 pages? Does Stephen King not have an editor? Does Stephen King's editor hate us? Why does Stephen King's editor hate us? What did you all do to Stephen King's editor to make him hate us so much? Is Stephen King's editor actually Pennywise? Is that the fun twist that I'm not understanding that made you all rate this book so highly? Is Pennywise threatening you with something scary unless you rate this book at least 4 stars? Do you need help? Blink twice if you need help. Why? And then, yes, there is a comment about the sewer scene. So, and then in conclusion, I hate this book and I hate everyone who made me think it was good. This book sucks and all of you also suck, and I hope Pennywise finds you in your dreams tonight. So firstly, I like this reviewer. I completely disagree with their assessment of the book, but this is a really humorous review and I love it, and I just feel like I'd be friends with this person. So very quickly, the sewer scene. I acknowledge what people's issue with it is. I do get it, and I think it's a valid thing if it makes people really uncomfortable. I didn't read it the same way a lot of people have read it. It's a sex scene, but it didn't read as sexual to me for some reason when I read it. Like, it felt very much, it felt like an important part of Beverly's story, and it didn't seem dirty to me. But I do understand that people have got an issue with it because, not only because of what it is, but because it was thought of by a man, a grown man that was writing it. So I think that people have just got this image of Stephen King, you know, fantasizing or something, which I really just don't think that that's what was happening personally. But that aside, I really like how long this book is. My favourite Stephen King books do tend to be the ones that are 1,000+ pages. I think his character work is brilliant, and I mean, it is about Pennywise, but it's also just about childhood fear, and it's an exploration of childhood trauma, and we've got our 7 main characters are all, you know, losers, self-named losers, for different reasons. They've all got different difficulties, and the real story is about, you know, friendship and sort of like becoming their own people and things like that. It's less about, I mean, the monsters are kind of metaphors, like Pennywise is kind of a metaphor. So I love the book, so I really enjoyed that review, but I disagree with it. I haven't actually put it in this video because I couldn't find it, but I saw a really funny review of The Shining once, which was a 1-star review, and it just said Jack is rude. Can't argue with it. Okay, next up, All the Fiends of Hell by Adam Neville. So this is his most recent novel. I thought it was amazing. It's about, it's an apocalyptic event about a guy called Carl who wakes up and everyone else just seems to be gone, and the sky keeps going red. There's this horrible sound and there are creatures, and he's trying to navigate that. And this review says, started really well, but around 22% I'm done. Carl is a terrible person and not very bright. Hadn't he been so extremely irritating, I might have read on, but no. I really liked Carl. I thought, you know, he's not Captain America levels of moral and perfect or anything, but, you know, he just seems like a normal, decent guy doing his best. One of the most compelling things about the book to me is that Carl is your average guy, or maybe in some people's estimations like a less than average guy for how capable and pragmatic he is. But that's what made the story so tense, because what he's up against would completely floor anybody. Hi Loki. So I think if Adam had written in a character that's like, say, some sort of special forces or something, like someone who is abnormally equipped to deal with a real emergency scenario like this one, I just don't think the book would have been as interesting. So I respectfully disagree. Now next, and this review is, so this is Black Sheep by Rachel Harrison, and this is major spoilers for like a huge plot point, so I can't stress enough that if you haven't read this yet and you're interested in reading it, please skip ahead to the next review, because I really just don't want this spoiled for you. But we're going into the review, which contains massive spoilers, in 3, 2, 1. Oh, reads like YA and really insulting to actual Satanists. Rachel Harrison could have at least skimmed the Wikipedia page for Satanism before writing this crap. Perpetuates a bunch of inaccurate cliche tropes about Satanists being devil worshippers and wearing pentagrams on everything. If she wanted the scary part of the book to be about a devil cult, she could have just made up a fake religion instead of misappropriating a real one. I'm honestly kind of surprised this made it to publication, because if she was slandering literally any other religion other than Satanism, this book would get cancelled on the basis of religious discrimination. Okay, so there is a bit more to the review, but I'm going to stop there. So I would really like to ask anyone watching this video, especially if you're a practicing Satanist and you're comfortable with doing so, I would really love to know if I'm like off the mark on what I'm about to say, because I believe in religious equality, and I actually agree that when Satanism is misappropriated, nobody cares, whereas when it happens with any other religion, it's taken seriously. And I think the reason for that is fairly obvious, in that Satanism is not taken seriously by society at large, and it is viewed more as, you know, just horned devils running around and the topic of horror fiction. However, I don't think that Rachel Harrison slandered the religion. Please hear me out. And she definitely didn't intend to, is how I would read this. So yeah, the book deals with our main character Vesper, who has left her church and therefore her community, and they're practicing Satanists, and Satan is a very real figure to them. And then she goes home, and then there's like a whole bunch of stuff that involves the actual devil, and yes, there are pentagrams and blah 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 blah. They actually really reminded me of the Spellmans from The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, and I'm pretty sure the Satanic Temple, if I'm not mistaken, did have an issue with The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina for the same reason as this reviewer has stated. So if this reviewer is a Satanist, this opinion, like, well, not that the opinion's invalid regardless, but yes, particularly valid. But from where I'm sitting, so I have no religion, I'm not Satanist. However, I am extremely interested in Satanism, and I went through this patch of time when I was younger where I was kind of exploring religion, and I read the King James version of the Christian Bible. I read the Quran English translation, so I don't know how accurate that was. I also read the LEBBON Satanic Bible and a whole bunch of other stuff, but I was particularly interested in the sort of like Christian Satanism divide, and I was reading any and all books that I could find about satanic occultism and things like that. So I'd like to think that I have a good general idea of this topic, but it's been a while since I actually read upon all of this stuff properly, so I could be wrong. So please, I am very open to being criticized in the comments, so please feel free. But my view of this is that, as far as I know currently, there are kind of like 3 different branches of Satanism. So we've got the fire and brimstone literal interpretation, where there are people who believe that the devil is real, it's the devil of the Christian faith, but they're in league with the devil and not God. that, you know, black magic exists and this kind of stuff. And I'll put some names on the screen for anyone interested, and there are figures through history that very much practiced this version of Satanism. It, you know, it was dark, it could be considered evil by most people's standards, and it's the kind of Satan worship that you see in horror fiction, that horror fiction has adopted as a character and a practice that we've seen over and over in like things like The Omen and Rosemary's Baby and things like that. Then there is LaVeyan Satanism. I think that the Satanic Bible, the Anton LaVey one, was written in the 50s, or 60s, I could be wrong. I think that's right from what I remember. And that straddles a weird line for me. So that Bible states that they don't actually believe in a literal devil, but they worship the symbol of non-conformity, and they disagree with the sort of commandments as set by the Christian Bible, and they have their own 10 commandments. And I do remember that there are things like you know, not harming children and animals and things like that. It's a more liberal view of humanity and opinion on equality. But then there are also sections in the LaVeyan Bible, Satanic Bible, about rituals and magic practices and the practicing the worship and stuff. So it seemed a little bit contradictory, or like some conflicted to me, because I wasn't sure. I was like, well, if they're doing rituals, do they believe in that? I don't know. And then there is the Satanic Temple, which again, as far as I know, they don't believe in a literal devil, but what they practice is around the idea of equality, basically, that's what I know about the Satanic Temple, is that they're very liberal and that they are constantly working for causes in aid of equality. So I subscribe to the Satanic Temple's newsletter, and I know that recently they're doing work on sort of medical equality for women in the wake of Roe versus Wade getting overturned and things like that. So the Satanic Temple, from everything that I've seen and read, it's a good practice. It feels very moral to me. I know that somebody set fire to the Satanic Temple last year and nobody cared, and this was a religious discrimination act. And I agree with the reviewer, Satanism and the Satanic Temple is not afforded the same respect as every other religion around the world. It is a bit different in that they're not really actually worshipping a literal deity, rather the symbol like the Baphomet statue and things. But yeah, in that iteration of Satanism, this kind of like literal devil turning up to scorch the earth would be considered very offensive. It's just that it's a bit hard for me because from what I know, like I said, there are 3 completely, totally different branches of it. And the other thing about it is that over time, Satan and Baphomet and Satanism in general, satanic worship, has become just quite a staple feature of horror fiction in itself. And it does go with a literal devil most of the time in those cases. So while it might not be representative of the Satanic Temple, it is representative of the more old school version of this religion, which is completely different. So, and it's the same way I think, you know, God is represented in films a lot of the time in complete contradiction with what the Bible says about God. I always wondered what people thought about Dogma, with God turning up and being a woman, and the angels are dicks, kind of. That's kind of my thoughts on that, whereas like I don't think that Rachel Harrison has done anything particularly offensive here, because I don't think she slandered the religion, because the version of the religion that she was using is more rooted in the old biblical fire and brimstone kind of version of it. But I am very happy to be corrected, and I would really like to know, but I would love to be corrected by anyone who's actually directly involved in this. So I'm not arguing, I just have a different opinion from what I know currently. Next up, we have The Silence by Tim LeBBon, and this is an apocalyptic story about a cave chamber being opened up, and then these flying creatures that hunt by sound come out, and the world goes into disarray. And the review says, "I think Hollywood, or the prospects thereof, has ruined Tim LeBBon. This is another action movie novel, much like his previous Coldbrook, so similar in fact that the plots could be swapped pretty easily without much alteration. Last time it was ravenous zombies from an alternate Earth, now it's ravenous flying things from deep within the Earth. Another survival story, very linear, very simplistic, with minimal character development. And then I'm going to jump to the end of the review, which says, in the end all they had to do was wait for winter anyway. Cold kills the creatures, which begs the question of how they survived in the caverns to begin with. None of it really makes much sense. So I want to address the end bit first, or I forgot. So yes, the creatures are you know, the icy, snowy terrain will kill them, but there's no way the characters could know that because the creatures are totally new to them when they come out. There's no way that the characters knew that they could just like wait out these creatures till winter or something. And it doesn't even seem to me like it would be winter in all areas, because different areas have got milder winters or harsher winters and temperatures, and there's a difference between the cold of a cavern and snow. So there's that. Also, this comparison to Coldbrook I took personal offence to, because Coldbrook is my favourite zombie novel of all time. I think that Tim Lebbon really I feel like he changed the genre with that book. It's amazing. And there is no similarity whatsoever, in my humble opinion, between Coldbrook and The Silence. Because while apocalyptic in nature, yes, that's it. That is the only thing. I'm so confused by this review, but like I said, everyone's thoughts are completely valid. I just couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. I love The Silence. Let's just move on before I cry about it like a little bitch. Next up, House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski, or Mark Z. Danielewski. This review says, totally infuriating. It made me feel dumb, bored, and annoyed all at once. If I want that, I'll date my first boyfriend again. I picked that review because it made me laugh. So, House of Leaves, you've probably heard of it if you read horror fiction, but it is a beast of a book that the formatting wise is nuts. It's a kind of a story within a story, and there are puzzles, and you know, there are bits of the book that you have to read with a mirror because the writing's backwards or upside down, or it's written in a swirl, or there's coded messages in there, like in the footnotes and things like that. I'm sure that I missed quite a lot as I was reading it. And there seem to be two camps of people, where there are people who think it's complete pretentious crap that has no merit and it's just the author trying to be intellectual. And then there are people like me who, like, I was quite confused initially, but then the further I got in, the more fun I found it, because I stopped trying to catch every little clue and puzzle in it, and I was just kind of working out the things that I noticed as I came across them and stuff. But the further I got into it and the puzzle solving aspect, the scarier I found the actual story. So I really enjoyed it, and I don't think that the author was like shooting for like super intellectualism. I think that they were just trying to create something new and fun and different, and they definitely did. So hate it or love it, it's definitely a one-of-a-kind book at the moment. I don't know anything else that exists like it, but I really like it. But I do understand why people don't, so I'm not going to get weird and precious and offended by that review, because a lot of people have got the same complaint, but I just really liked it. Next up, The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. So this is a shorter story written decades ago about a woman that's been she's been diagnosed with hysteria, and her treatment is to be locked in a room with absolutely no entertainment or stimulus of any kind, and it's got this gross yellow wallpaper, and it starts to do funny things to her mind. And the review says, all about a wallpaper, kind of creepy. If there was some inner meaning, I didn't get it. Very short book, but wouldn't recommend. So I don't think that people should need the wider context of a book to enjoy it, so I think this review is totally valid if they didn't like connect to anything in it or read anything more into it than what was on the surface. That's totally fine reading. But for those who might be interested, so I love this story, and initially I didn't, and I've got a whole backstory about that, about how I even came to read it in the first place. I felt like I was in the Yellow Wallpaper, and the Yellow Wallpaper adventure is a story for a different day. But so only decades ago, not hundreds of years, decades ago, it was a treatment. That was the treatment. If a woman complained about anything to a doctor, or her husband complained on her behalf to a doctor, a lot of the time, you know, these male doctors would just say, oh, the woman's hysterical, put her in a room in solitary confinement, basically, which is a punishment in prison and can be used for torture to some extent. So just bear that in mind, that this is how women were treated when they had ailments, especially psychological ailments, like if they had postnatal depression or anxiety or anything. That's how this was treated. And the author had personal experience of this, so she wrote this story. And so the wider meaning of this story is about how women who are completely normal, I say normal in inverted commas, but women who are like medically normal, psychologically normal, but they're just suffering some sort of ailment, you know, that could have, you know, the way that we would treat that these days is like take a few days to rest, or, you know, actually provide some sort of medication or something. This is, women were just thrown into rooms out of the way, basically, to not be a pain, and then that would then cause psychological problems depending on how long they were locked in there. So the idea was that they were hysterical and they had to calm down, so they just wouldn't be allowed to have anything that would stimulate them. So I'm talking no books, no music, no, you couldn't write anything, like preferably there wouldn't even be a window. So this would just be a woman in a room with a bed, and that's it. No companionship. They'd be fed, but it would be, you know, food thrown into the room. No, you know, no company, no art, no literature, no nothing to pass the time. And you can imagine that after days, weeks, or even months of that, people start to lose their minds a little bit. So this story is a psychological horror story about the prolonged effect that this is having on this woman that's already, you know, having a bit of a bad time, and then this is how she's treated. So the wider context of this is really about how women are treated by the medical community and men back in the day, but it's still relevant to an extent now, especially, you know, depending on where you live in the world. So that's the wider context. And I personally think it's a really powerful piece of writing, and I really enjoyed it as a like sort of scary, almost gothic feeling story. Like, it's not really a gothic story because it doesn't actually deal with like death in the way that gothic fiction deals with death, but it definitely has that sort of like classic gothic feel to it. Next, speaking of psychological horror, Full Immersion by Gemma Moore. So this is one of the newer entries on this list of books I love, and it's about a woman in an experimental treatment when she is severely suffering from postnatal depression, and it gets crazy. No pun intended, but the book does get crazy. And this review says, oh, sad to give this only 1 star because the subject matter is so personal to the author, but this is a story where nothing really comes together. The premise is interesting, but the writing just isn't creative or good enough for it to hold up. I respectfully disagree again. I think Gemma Moore is definitely creative and the writing is good enough for this to hold up, and also it very much does come together in the end. So you have a woman who she's gone into this like experimental treatment, so she's sort of suspended, and then they're watching her dreams and they're trying this sort of like therapy while she's unconscious, and so the idea is to like explore her subconscious and then work out her anxieties and her trauma like in that state. But then things start to manifest outside, and there are things that are going on like inside and outside this woman's mind at the same time, and it very much does come together in the end. Like, I didn't know how it was going to come together, and I just read quite a lot of like deep meaning into this. As like, you know, the physical horror aspects are really good, especially in the 3rd act. but they also serve as a very powerful metaphor for these kinds of illnesses. And I just thought it was a great piece of writing and a really great story. Got 2 left. Next up, House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson, and the review says, "This was the biggest piece of trash I've read in a long time. The cover pulled me in. There was no background or world building or character development. There were so many plot holes. I guess this would be a hit for readers of 50 Shades, which I never read. This is a very poorly written gothic lesbian porn. I need to be much more discerning about the publishers I choose." Okay, so once again, everyone's opinion is valid. My opinion is not right or wrong, it's just different, and it's completely different. So to address every single thing in this review, I can't argue with someone saying that something's trash, because that's completely subjective. But there's no background or world building. I'm so flabbergasted by that critique, because I thought that one of the strongest aspects of the book was the world building, because so it's about it's about a really poor woman who's offered an opportunity to be a blood maid, and blood maids are exactly what they sound like, and they're stationed in rich people's houses, basically people who can afford to live in manors and have these kinds of servants. And it just felt really vampiric, and it like gave me this like idea of British society. I can't even remember if it's actually set in Britain, but that's how I was feeling it. I was just imagining like these sort of like houses of nobility dotted around, and then all of them with these servants and things, and what was going on in these houses. And the further that the story develops, the bigger the world seemed to me about what was going on. And we're dealing with one noble household, but then I started wondering about the wider world of all of the noble households, and if they all run like this one does. So I thought that the world building was really good. I don't know about the plot holes. I've only read the book once, so there could well be plot holes. I guess this would be a hit for readers of 50 Shades. So and saying that it's very poorly written gothic lesbian porn, that actually does annoy me a little bit, because I feel like, and I'm so sorry if you wrote this review, please, feel free to slate me in the comments if you want, but I just feel like this is written by somebody that's a prude or possibly has an issue with lesbians, because it's nowhere near gothic lesbian porn. I can't stress enough, it's nothing like 50 Shades. Like there is definitely an erotic element to it, and there's it's definitely a little bit gay, but it's not egregious. It's not over the top. It's not like done for the sake of sexiness or anything. It's just part of the characters that we're dealing with, and I actually thought it was very light on that front. So I just I don't know. Also, making a comparison to 50 Shades and then going on to say that you've never read it is just an interesting complaint, because how do you know what readers of I mean, I did have a little look at 50 Shades and I couldn't. It's not my jam personally, but that is fan fiction smut, and I think everyone will acknowledge that. Whereas this is a story about, this is a rags to riches story that veers into supernatural territory and sets up a world where there's scope for expansion, and it's just, and I'd say it's gay friendly, but it's not anywhere near porn. So and I say that as a prude, so while everybody's opinions are valid, I'm just confused about that one. And last, speaking of gay porn, Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. That was a joke. So I think everyone basically knows this story. This review says, "Life's too short and this is freaking terrible. Even after switching to audiobooks so that I can limit the amount of attention given over to the atrocious narrative voice, the pointless plot and the interminable angst, it's still too over the top to finish, not worth the calories." So this is just a difference in taste. So Interview with the Vampire is very stylized. It's classic gothic fiction, basically. It's horror, but also it's There'd been a lot of readings on it in recent years. So Louis and Lestat come together and then they make a vampire, well, Louis makes a vampire child, and then they're basically functioning as a same-sex couple with a daughter. And so I feel like it was actually quite ahead of its time for a story written, I think it's in the early 90s, and set a couple hundred years back as well. It's not going to be for everybody because it has quite the melodramatic flair to it. It's very these vampires, like Lestat is extremely melodramatic, Louis is full of angst. I honestly don't think that we would have had characters like Angel from Buffy if it wasn't for this book. And then the film with Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt. But it's not going to be for everyone. It's definitely going to be for people who enjoy sort of like a romantic, but like a dark romantic flair, like not romantic in the sort of contemporary sense. It's just a bit, it's deeper than they're a couple, because it's I mean, they never explicitly stated that they're a couple or anything, and there's no reason to think that they've actually got that relationship, but there's so much hinted at. There's a lot under the surface is what I'm saying. So it's not going to be for everybody, but it was for me. I really enjoyed it. And if you're someone who likes the like the Francis Ford Coppola version of Dracula, the screen version, like this is probably a book that you'd really like. It's got that same kind of sort of like velvety gothic feel to it. So that was me getting mildly wound up by reviews of books I absolutely love. 5-star reads. I love, one of the first things I do when I finish a book that I would give 5 stars, and I absolutely love it, is I always go to Goodreads and look at the 1-star reviews, because sometimes people point out really valid critiques that I hadn't considered when I was reading it, and normally that won't skew my overall feeling about a book, but I do like to see different perspectives, and especially things like Black Sheep, where that reviewer said it was offensive to the religion. That does make me think, because that's not something I considered at all while I was reading it. So despite what I said earlier, once again, like, I am quite open to being wrong about my opinion on it. But it's just always fun, isn't it? It's just always a fun time. So I'd love to know your opinions. Do you get wound up by massive differences of opinion, or like, do you take it personally if you love a book and then someone that in your real life, for example, says that they hate it? Like, have you ever got into arguments about any books? I'd really love to know, because I used to argue with people all the time when I was a bit younger, but I've just come to not care enough to argue anymore. I'm old and I'm tired. I hope this video... I'll tell you what's really offensive to me, Baphomet, the Horned One, is that you haven't subscribed. I'll be back on Thursday with another bookish video, Friday with a gaming video with GamerGoat, and then on Saturday and Sunday with more bookish stuff and another author interview. Bleed!